Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and as always, welcome back to another Mortal Kombat video. Today, I actually touched on something I never thought I'd discuss on the channel. And with Chaos Reigns on the horizon, and seeing as, you know, we're kind of touching on the multiverse, multiple timelines, reboots of reboot timelines, and oh god, where does it end? I thought that today we could touch on a topic and a game that I've actually never taken the time to analyze on the channel. A project that was long believed to be dead and buried. The mysterious Mortal Kombat 8. Not that one, god no, not that one at all. I'm talking about the real Mortal Kombat 8. The one that actually was in development prior to the creation of MK vs DC. Today we will be talking about that missing sequel, the known details surrounding it, its creation, and the somewhat mystery surrounding its cancellation and change. Thus, we will be doing a deep dive analysis of the MK game that never quite came to be, yet one that does surprisingly live on in many different ways through many future titles. So with that said, where does this take us? Well, to get a better picture of this whole situation, and to truly kind of understand what's became of this installment, we gotta first dial things all the way back to the mid-2000s, with the team coming off the cusp of their last game, Mortal Kombat Armageddon. And this was a very interesting time for the studio as a whole, because behind the scenes, the team's publisher, Midway, was actually on the cusp of bankruptcy. And I do have a tinfoil hat theory, how that does actually largely reflect in the quality of Armageddon's game design. Because whilst admittedly, that game does have a wealth of content, such as the gargantuan roster, a conquest mode, a crypt, a creator fighter mode, and some great fun party modes. Unlike its predecessor, Deception, a game that really innovated the series, Armageddon in comparison felt a little bit stagnant in that respect. Not terrible in its wealth of content, but feeling like more of the same. And because of this, the caveats and issues with the game were quite noticeable, as previous established storylines like the one being were completely dropped in favor of a very different tale between two twin brothers. One that honestly did kind of come out of nowhere. Along with this, the conquest mode was far more linear and less compelling, enforcing a bit more of a stricter narrative, and in terms of gameplay, a sense of individuality was lost. Due to the vast roster and the many different characters on it, certain characters emulated each other's fighting styles, making them feel a bit less special in that regard, and the somewhat personalized fatalities that characters normally had would instead be replaced by a universal system called Create a Fatality, which is admittedly quite fun. However, it definitely loses its luster after a few goes. Overall, Armageddon is a great but an inherently flawed product, and due to its somewhat lack of variety and individuality, the game as a whole is seen as wide as an ocean, but as shallow as a puddle. It's pretty evident that some cuts were taken here for this grandiose finale, at least narratively. Whether that's due to budget or Midway's eventual liquidation, that is absolutely anyone's guess. But from what you can tell from my use of language here, yes, Armageddon at its core was actually designed as a finale to the series. A true, definitive, and final end. Despite what some people on Twitter would say of wanting to continue the original timeline. Armageddon was always created in mind to be the last installment of this timeline. And we do learn of this through interviews with Ed Boon, when he does ever so loosely touch on the topic of this game. We do actually get some snippets and details here regarding what shape Mortal Kombat 8 was taking. And these interviews say that from the ground up, 8 was designed to be a reboot, one that goes back to the basics and the foundation of the franchise. However, Ed reiterates that he did want to put a modern spin on it, having a darker, serious, gritty tone that was free of the vibrant, saturated colors. So in terms of direction, the MK they were working on was going to take a dark route, and I'll mention how these influences would come into play later on. But during these early interviews, we learn of Ed Boon's biggest influence for this direction, and that is actually Gears of War, favoring the more adult and mature tone the game took. And if you really think about it, a lot of that influence does come into play for future installments, with MK vs DC starting the trend of a more linear-esque cinematic story. Along with this, the more visually dark grey tones would actually be something implemented during Mortal Kombat X, as it noticeably has a far greyer colour palette, and in many ways does homage Gears of War in that respect. So it's very interesting to know that a game outside the fighting game genre really did have such a big impact on MK on a creative level. And here's a funny ha-ha thing, right? There's actually a really large chance you've actually seen concept art for this game and never known about it. How do I know this? Because it fucking happened to me! Courtesy of the artist Vincent Prose. What you're seeing here are some really early illustrated concepts of how the characters could have looked in game. So let's go through them one by one, starting off with everyone's favourite poster boy, Scorpion. And you can really tell here already that they were super leaning into that Reboot darker tone. Because whilst this visual design is a callback to the original MK1, the colour of the yellow looks very dirty and decayed. In fact, a very nice interesting design detail is that apparently the yellow on his gi isn't tied to that of the Shirai Ryu, but the blood of the demon who resurrected him, having been brought back to life to hunt down Sub-Zero, the man who murdered him. But unlike the original canon, we do learn that it was Shang Tsung responsible for killing him. So a lot of elements here still do remain the same, but are executed in a very different manner. Sub-Zero, from what you can visually tell here, takes on a way darker tone. Honestly, kind of looking like a White Walker from Game of Thrones. And now that I do get a good look at him, it does look like elements from this overall design did influence his MKX one. So just an interesting detail I wanted to throw out there. In terms of origin, Sub-Zero would actually belong to a clan known as the Way of the Frost Dragon, a group of honourable fighters designated to protect Earthrealm. So not quite the Lin Kuei. Here, he and his clan would have a long-standing rivalry with Scorpion, one that isn't really given a name here. Thus, all in all, this version isn't too different beyond the clan change. The biggest and horrific alterations here are all from a visual standpoint, looking very zombie-esque, but this could have possibly been done to put more of a heavy emphasis of his Cryomancer lineage, somewhat embodying Death's cold embrace. Our next illustration we have here would in fact be Raiden, and there's very little illustrated about him, only that he rarely touches the ground. So if we're drawing ideas from his visual design, clothes, and illustration here, they could have been leaning into the whole divine god guardian part of the character, where he's too good to tread on mortal ground. And in terms of looks here, he does look distinctly different to everyone else, utilizing much brighter colors, probably a sort of symbolism of his holiness. This one is pretty good, maybe a tad bit over-designed and a little bit pretentious in some areas, yet nonetheless still a very interesting take on the character. Now moving along to our next individual here, we do have Sonya Blade, and this is a really weird design, like even for Sonya, because whilst I like that she retains elements of her sex appeal in her overall design, the design as a whole kind of feels a little bit everywhere. Like what I mean is that we have a weird amalgamation of stuff on her that doesn't really fit her. The headband, a nice touch, and a great callback. Her top is in line with her character and a very suitable color. Again, yet another callback. But the tattoos? They are a bit out there for Sonya, but it isn't really bad. If anything, it kind of adds a little bit of a sense of attitude and confidence to her design. But the rest here doesn't really feel like Sonya. Like, for one, why does she not have pants here? Again, I get it for like the sex appeal part of this character, but with how heavily designed her top half is, it really feels far too minimal here. I feel like super tight cargo shorts would work. Also, she has a sword, and this is a weapon you just don't associate with the character. Again, very out of place. And then she has a spiked gauntlet, which I will say is definitely a better design choice than the sword. It feels more in line with the brawler aspects of this character. All in all, I personally consider this to be the weakest design, as it's just kind of all over the place, and it doesn't really feel like Sonya. In terms of origin though, it definitely feels more in line with her original self, as she's the daughter of a Texan Ranger with a background in Special Forces. Unfortunately, there isn't much else that goes off this design here, but yeah, it's a very peculiar take on her, and I am kind of glad that they didn't go this low. Yes, I'm part of the MK9 Sonya gang, fight me. For Kano though, this is pretty damn on point for a modernized look for him, as he has the knives, the gi, a very gruff, dark demeanor. It's all really spot on. In terms of origin though, there are some alterations here, as he no longer comes from Australia, but instead is half Japanese, half American. And I do kind of like that that's reflected in his visual design here, as he's of course rocking a gi, and the ties to militarized warfare could maybe come from his ties to America. I think it works pretty well overall. Unfortunately though, that's it for the illustrated designs that have floated across the internet. But I do hope it gives you an idea for the tone and direction they were actually looking to go in. Thus now it brings us onto the question of, why was Mortal Kombat 8 scrapped? Well, to this day, it is a bit of a mystery. If I am going to make an educated guess for my understanding of the studio, as well as the situation they were placed in, Mortal Kombat 8 was probably shelved when they got the all clear with Warner Brothers. As once they locked in their crossover with DC, it was more or less a done deal, and with Midway in financial strife, this was probably a last-ditch effort from the studio for success. Because you gotta think about it, crossovers really sell. And at that particular time, the superhero market wasn't oversaturated. It was very unique and special when something new came out. Thus, it gave us the black sheep of MK games, Mortal Kombat vs DC, a game that was reviewed really well on release, but largely dismissed by its fans due to its censorship of fatalities and very questionable gameplay mechanics. I definitely look at this particular installment as a bit of a necessary evil, because without its creation or crossover, then it wouldn't have built the business relationship that the MK team needed in order to be purchased by Warner. Because by doing so, it gave the team the opportunity they needed to make the real reboot they always had in mind, Mortal Kombat 9. I, by all intents and purposes, believe that MK9 was everything MK8 was conceptually designed to be, because during the shift, many members of the Midway team stayed on when NetherRealm was formed. They were simply rebranded under the Warner Brothers publisher. So with funding no longer an issue, it really did feel like the foundation was there to be capitalized on. And it was done in a really big way, because with the added context of what happened with Midway and Armageddon, as well as the shift to MK vs DC, the opening to MK9 actually serves as a true continuation and a somewhat way to tie up loose ends from Armageddon, giving us the one being ending, even if it was just merely a peek. So I do hope this paints an overall better light of what exactly happened to MK8 behind the scenes, and the various different factors that did play a part in its getting shelved. A really weird and funny thing to come out of this though, and some of you may have actually been a bit too young to know this, is that a lot of assets from MK vs DC would be utilized in MK9. And I don't strictly just mean that Joker and Shang Tsung fatality, because originally Quan Chi was designed to be DLC for that crossover, but due to the bankruptcy and acquisition, all DLC would be cancelled. Hence how Quan Chi is in game and in cutscene here, but is completely unplayable. In fact, if you look at Quan here, you can see that he still retains his overall visual design in Mortal Kombat 9, meaning that, yeah, he was probably simply just ported over. And this wouldn't be the only glimmer of MK vs DC in MK9, as Scorpion would show up in the MK9's promotional trailer, rocking his default design from that game. And during the opening sequence of MK9, we see Shao utilizing that design before undergoing a visual change in game. I am absolutely sure that there's more to this story than what I've talked about here, but that's probably stuff going on behind the curtain that led to the decision of MK vs DC. Thus, I hope this has given you an overall better sense of clarity of what became of this installment. Admittedly, making this, I must say, I was very pleasantly surprised, finding out as much stuff as I did about MK8. In particular, those art assets, which I have seen for years but never knew where they came from, and that Gears of War of all games is the one that influenced Ed Boon during the Reboot trilogy. In fact, now I think about it more, it does actually explain why there was such a heavy focus on the special forces during MKX and 11. could absolutely be an over-analysis on my part, but I definitely think there's some ties between the two here. With that said, everyone, I hope you had fun watching this and learnt more by doing so. I actually really enjoyed putting this together, as it's always quite fun to peel behind the curtain. So if you're interested in more videos like this, I do strongly recommend checking out my video on MK9, as it does touch on a lot of data mined assets, and what was cut from the full release of the game. But for now, everyone, that's been it for me. So as always, everyone, stay strong, stay well, and take care. I'll catch you in the next one.